All right. Good morning, everybody. Good to see everyone in here. Grab yourself a cup of coffee. We're going to kick off in just a minute. I have to do 3 shows today, everybody. I'm drinking tea like I'm a singer. Yorkshire tea, if everybody wants to know. Tea from Harrogate in the UK is the best tea there is. I don't care what anybody says. As somebody who lived in Yorkshire for way too long, I do love Yorkshire, by the way. Best tea in the world. All right, and with that, we got a good crowd in, so let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 57th, 57th episode of FinTech Insider, the Breakfast Show US. I'm Sam Aul, Love Invest Managing Director North America. I'll be your host for the morning show. As your host, one of the things I always ask everybody is let us know where you're at in the world. We'd love seeing our international audience on this. We'll definitely give you a shout out. And our domestic audience, we love y'all too. Let us know where you're at in the US. We'll make sure we give you a shout out. Do us a favor though, that share button. So if you look down, you'll see a little share link. Click on that thing. Let your network know you're watching this thing. Smack the like buttons. They help. Go emoji crazy. We don't care. And also subscribe to 11FS on LinkedIn so you never miss a show. And if you haven't read our latest research report yet that we did together with Plaid about how open finance will shape the industry, then go find it on the link that Bianca will put in the comments section or at bit.ly/openfinance2020. All right, first off, 3 news stories from the past 24 hours that caught my attention and should have yours. Reuters reports on the Wirecard saga. Oh my God, this movie is going to be incredible when it comes out. So Reuters reports Wirecard's former boss, Markus Braunwas, and I know I slaughtered that name, Markus Braun, was arrested Tuesday on suspicion of falsifying accounts after the German payments firm disclosed a $2.1 billion financial hole and questioned whether trustees had actually held money on its own behalf. In his 18 years in charge, Braun transformed an offshoot of the dot-com boom, known for handling payments for online gambling and adult entertainment sites, into a $20 billion plus fintech that won a place in Germany's blue chip DAX index. The former consultant traded in a suit for a black roll neck sweater and portrayed himself as a tech visionary, telling investors in New York last autumn that Wirecard would increase revenues by 6 times by 2025 as the digital payments boom continued to move on. Wirecard's meteoric rise was, however, accompanied by repeated allegations from whistleblowers, journalists, and speculators that its revenue and profits had been pumped up through fake transaction with obscure partners. The Munich prosecutor's office said on Tuesday that Braun now stands accused of misrepresenting Wirecard's accounts and of market manipulation by falsifying income from transactions with so-called third-party acquirers. My recommendation, folks, if you've got a startup founder that's wearing a black Steve Jobs turtleneck and only that, go read Bad Blood on Theranos if you want to get my opinion on that. Next story, New York Times is reporting thousands of small enterprises that use Square to process their credit card transactions, including plumbers, legal consultants, and construction firms, have complained that the company recently began holding back 20 to 30% of the money they collected from customers. The withholdings come with little warning, they said, and Square asserted the right to hang on to the money for the next 4 months. Square told them it was doing this to protect against risky transactions or customers who demanded their money back. But several affected businesses provided documents to the New York Times showing they had not had any returns or risk flags. Over the last month, around 1,300 business owners have signed an online petition asking Square to end the withholding. On Facebook, Twitter, and consumer complaint sites, an array of small businesses have complained about the tough situation Square has put them in. On Tuesday, Square published a blog post to explain the new rolling reserve policy, the one that some merchants had experienced. And I will be very surprised if Square doesn't get ahead of this story really soon. Let's just think about what a sweetheart overall Square has been in this space, but still, with everything happening to small businesses right now, this is one they need to address. And last but not least, Forbes has reported that the software company nCino has filed for an IPO. The Wilmington, North Carolina-based startup is seeking to raise $100 million in their IPO. It was announced Monday. A regulatory filing with the SEC did not disclose how many shares the company planned to sell or at what price. I've known the folks at nCino. I actually met their founder several years ago at Money 2020. And I remember when they first came out, people were just saying, yeah, it's just a solution sitting on top of Salesforce. Heck no. Anybody that's worked with nCino knows how good of a company they are. Love it. One of the co-founders actually was a professor for UNC Wilmington in North Carolina. You got to love stories, success stories like this. All right, with this, let's get our guest in. Today, we're super excited to be joined by Catherine Van Noyes, the U.S. head of FinTech at AWS, Amazon Web Services. And today's show, we'll be talking about the importance of using the cloud and how AWS is partnering with fintechs. Catherine, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me on the show. I'm a big fan.
How is, and I'm a big fan too. We're all big fans, because this is all we do anymore. We're all sit on Zoom and stare at each other. I'm assuming you are in New York City?
Normally based in New York City. I had to come out to my parents in the suburbs. Apartments in New York are not conducive to having multiple people working from home and a child as well. So.
Oh, no, they are not. I will back that up. This has been a grind, to say the least, for folks that are based in New York. However, y'all have done a great job, New York and Michigan, I think, of flattening that curve. I live in Florida, and we'll just move right on from that. What's that? I'm the only one live right now? Oh, I'm sorry. I got folks, like I said, we do this live. It's fun. I got producer talking in my ear. Catherine, if you don't mind, can you talk a little bit about your role? You have a unique role at AWS. Can you talk a little bit about what it is you do there?
Sure. So at AWS, I think when I think about my role, I want to help make sure AWS provides the strongest value proposition possible for fintechs to build and grow. So I'm part of a much larger startup organization that's made up of former founders and investors and startup executives. And sort of the whole goal is to focus on helping startups grow and build successful businesses on AWS. And so we're focused the very earliest stages, helping provide technical support, training, credit, certifications to help startups get up and running. And then we have teams of compliance experts who work with customers to help them understand various regulations, best practices for building their technology on AWS. So for example, B2C fintechs, how do you help protect customer data? For B2B fintechs, how can we help you become enterprise ready and successfully sell into enterprises? So we do a lot of work around is making sure we're more than just an infrastructure provider. We want to be a real partner to the businesses and the startups that are using AWS.
And, it's amazing the market dominance AWS has had for years. Obviously, a lot more competition coming in, but it's just the entire path of Amazon from day one. I do remember back around in the very late 90s, friends of mine telling me to buy Amazon stock. I was like, That's why I'm doing this show live from my daughter's bedroom in Jacksonville, Florida. Let me go ahead and get that out of the way. When it comes to me and predicting the future, just, I don't know what to say. I've told that story multiple times on this show, which makes me laugh. You know what I like, though, about your past, when you look at the role you're doing now? I mean, you've been in the fintech space. You've been in the startup space. Can you talk just a little bit about some of the roles you had there?
Yeah, so I think my background's sort of an interesting mix in that I started in one of those training programs right out of college at Citigroup. Yeah. I was in mortgage securitization, so in debt capital markets, and then was at Lehman Brothers where I was on short-term credit trading, so focused on asset-backed commercial paper. So definitely a bit of a front row seat to what was happening, both given the products that I worked on and being at Lehman. And that was right at the beginning of my career. So after that, I ended up getting my first taste of startups. So I worked for Robinia Global Economics. I moved over to London, where I ultimately ran the sales team for EMEA and Asia. And that was where I got into startups, really, that kind of growing fast, wear a lot of hats, take on a lot of responsibilities. And so then ultimately, I ended up moving into fintech, where I led the business development and then capital markets side of it was initially an income share agreement platform that moved to consumer lending, and then a small business lender before I joined AWS just a little over 2 years ago.
Yeah, you've got, if I had to kind of pick the perfect background for somebody with your role, I would say, I want somebody that has done the startup, right? Has been through those early seed rounds. I think I actually saw you at Lendit back like around 2014 or 2015.
Probably. I think I went to the first Lendit.
I did.
Oversold, yeah.
Oh my God, I did see you there, working the laptop, right, doing the demo. That's incredible. But you know what? That's important that you were on that side of the podium or on that side of the table. And then, and coming out of Citi and at Lehman's, I think you were at Lehman's at an interesting time. If I'm not mistaken, you were there around 2008. Is that right?
Yeah, I was there kind of through the end.
Oh, there you go. You know what? That's an experience that I wouldn't wish on anybody, but you know what? You learn, right?
You learn, and I was early in my career, so I didn't have crazy
Yep.
savings or a lot invested in my 401k, et cetera. So I think for me, it was okay.
Just so, and for the listeners, just so um, we've had a couple folks on that we're part of Lehman's too, right? And I mean, nobody saw that coming. I've been on that side. In the 90s, I worked for the record keeper that had Enron as a client. I used to audit Enron's retirement accounts, folks. Again, this is why I'm doing this show live from Alex Mall's bedroom in Jacksonville, Florida. Let's talk a little bit, though, about the program that you do with AWS and its focus on fintechs, right? Can you dive? One thing I'm really always interested in, obviously, from a technology standpoint, from a tech stack standpoint, and that type of talent, you guys bring a ton of experience there. But there's the other side of fintech too, right? I mean, how do you go to market, for example? How do you acquire customers? That's the massive hurdle they have to overcome. So how do you help them with that?
Yeah, so I think with the go-to-market programs, we have something called the AWS Partner Network, and that's really where we work very closely with companies and think about how can we help them successfully sell into. It's really focused a little more on B2B, but selling into our joint enterprise customers. And so we've done a lot of work there. For example, more recently, with everything going on, we worked with a company called Finxact. So they are core banking as a service solution. Yep. And they had to kind of really accelerate the timetable of onboarding new bank customers. And so working with them, we were able to ensure over $2 billion in CARES Act funding was distributed. So it's like those kinds of examples in that work that's really interesting. And I think some of the other stuff that we're doing is around, you look at companies like Propel, they're a food stamp app and they help users check their balance and transactions. And so given what's going on right now, kind of looking at their business, helping make sure they're positioned to scale up and given the increased demand on their services. So at a critical time that they can serve their customers. So I think ultimately, as we think about getting them up and running in the technology, but then we want to make sure, okay, what can we do beyond that to make sure they're able to kind of scale, weather these difficult environments, expand globally. There's a lot that we can do for the companies that are building on AWS.
What's this been like because you're New York based? What's this been like over the past few months? I know when you took the job, you didn't think you'd be doing this out of your apartment or your parents' spare bedroom.
No, yeah. Well, luckily, it's funny. One of the reasons I joined AWS was because it functions very much like a startup within a big business. And it's, it might sound crazy given just how large it is and the number of people that work there, but it's very nimble and innovative. And so we really transitioned without a hitch to working remotely. It actually was a team that was on the road a lot, so that wasn't challenging. What we did see initially is a lot of our customers just sort of the needs shifted. So initially, as you can imagine, everyone's trying to figure out, cut costs, reduce, burn as much as possible. And so we were getting, inundated with customer conversations and working with them closely to reduce cost. So we quickly put out webinars to kind of, everything we have to do has to be at scale because we have, millions of customers building. So how can we kind of get this important content into the hands of all of our customers? So we put together a lot of, webinars, information so that startups specifically could immediately look at different ways. All right, let's reduce costs. Let's think about some quick wins. And then longer term, we'll look at how do we re-architect? How do we look at bringing in services such as serverless technology to kind of bring down kind of the overall infrastructure spend that our companies have?
I'll tell you, we did some work. 11FS did with AWS. I think it was last year. All the years blend together. Now I can't even remember what year this is. But we went to Vegas for one of the AWS conferences. Is it called Ignite? I don't remember.
The reInvent, probably?
reInvent. Oh my God. All right. So I went to Vegas. Y'all think Money 2020 is big? Yeah, exactly. Go to an AWS conference where it's all engineers, by the way. And so I remember going to that. We were doing interviews for it, but it was 60 to 80,000 folks in Vegas for this thing, and like 3,000 breakout sessions. And I'm not exaggerating, everybody. 3,000 breakout sessions where you literally just go down to the micro level on how to use the services, right? And the data that they had. So that was an eye-opening experience for me. I understood probably 50 out of the 3,000 sessions that were going on because it's been too long since I was a developer. So y'all have massive growth, and you do those
Mm.
in multiple cities. By the way, that conference just wasn't in Vegas. We've had a good question come in from Siddharth. Siddharth is a company founder out in San Francisco. So Siddharth, love the question. I'm going to paraphrase it here. He loves AWS. His whole platform runs on it for his company. He's asking about the data sets that you provide. So the open data sets, because fintech companies, when they're doing use cases, the data they're actually able to get their hands on means everything, and that's tough, by the way. So how do you all focus the what data sets you provide for your fintech companies or to be able to work with?
Yeah, so one of the organizations we do a lot of work with is a FinTech Sandbox, who was created to help solve that exact problem, kind of bring lower cost data for fintechs to build and train and test their models. So we actually launched a service called the AWS Data Exchange. We announced it at reInvent in November, right just before that. And that really makes it very easy for both data providers or companies that have data they want to monetize to post data sets, and then data consumers to look and search and easily and securely and compliantly kind of get access to new data. So we did a number of partnerships. So one is with TransUnion. They have a startup credit kit that we're making available for very early stage fintechs through this platform, and a number of other ways that we're trying to get new data into the hands of fintech. So this is sort of one channel that we're using, and it's been doing a lot of great work already for startups, and also some of the, as you can imagine, some of the bigger enterprises and alternative lenders and finance providers.
Yeah, you got a nice shout out here from Sunaina. She's the head of data acquisition at M Science in New York. Been on the show. Hey, Sunaina. She said, we completely moved to AWS a few months ago. Absolutely love it. We're 100% in the cloud. It's seamless. I think that component is so important right now. And I think this whole pandemic we've gone through has, what's the word I wanted to say, shed a light on or shown how resilient a lot of these systems have been. You think about the sheer volume of services that you all have to provide and that consistency of uptime. And the fact that we're doing this right now, right? Live streaming this and doing this just, across the globe. We're watching a stress test in real life, people, and in real time.
Yeah, I think it's, first of all, digital services have just never been as important as they are now. And so we've been helping at AWS enable remote work, maintain operational resilience of kind of mission critical applications, scale global market systems. Stripe, for example, was built on AWS from day one, and they're live in I think over 40 countries now. So, online trading platforms, e-commerce payment solutions, we've just been really there to help facilitate all of that.
So Gene Donnelly just said, thank you so much for the shout out for the FinTech Sandbox. And Gene, thanks for coming on this over and over again. We appreciate it. Dr. Abdullah, hey, how are you in Saudi Arabia? I knew you'd ask this question because he's an oil and gas biotech cybersecurity inventor. That is the greatest job description I've ever heard. And he asked about your data, anything around cybersecurity there. That's it.
Yeah, so I think that's actually one of the reasons, I think when you think about security and compliance, I think that's actually one of the reasons that so many fintechs, fintech show, and that's kind of my area, are choosing to build on us. So for us, security is job zero. And so startups can benefit from the best practices that we have from working with the most security sensitive customers. So we have the military customers, the CIA, and global banks that are all running on AWS. And so we have our own suite of solutions, and we also have an entire partner ecosystem and network for additional cyber.
Through a great session in New York, probably about a year ago. It was with City FinTech, and they had one of the heads of AWS sitting there, and that was one of the questions that came out from the audience, right? This whole concept of financial institutions and getting the data on the cloud and how secure is it? And I will never forget his response, which was, trust me, the volume of audits and data probes that we go through at AWS from multiple industries, compared to any bank's data center, we're probably 10, 15, 20 times the volume that you see when it comes to pen tests, when it comes to audits and everything else. And I never forget just chuckling at that answer, because I thought, oh, hell yeah. You all are seeing this at scale across multiple verticals, not just one. And that's actually a good question that Janine has just asked. She said, "What's the biggest obstacle working with financial institutions?" We only have 10 minutes, Gene. So,
Yeah.
seriously,
Um,
maybe one or two challenges. How's that instead of obstacles? What are some
yeah.
challenges?
Well, I think what I'd say is we're seeing a lot of kind of positive momentum happening in that space. When you think about kind of fintechs partnering with banks, I think the one thing that I'm sure you can kind of all appreciate is just the procurement processes and the cycles and sort of onboarding of
Yeah.
fintechs is just a challenge. And every bank is going about it a little differently. They have innovation teams or different arms that sort of help navigate fintechs or other startups, just other partners even through the organization. I think we are seeing a lot of positive momentum. So kind of anecdotally, I've been feeling that and what I hear from fintechs and banks and innovation teams. But then, last year there was over 180% increase in bank investment. So I think what we're seeing in startups, so I think we're seeing kind of banks that are now starting to invest in companies that they want to do business with or want to partner with or already using their technology. And so I hope that continues to increase. But I think when you think about, large institutions, like one of the big challenges I think that they're in general having is around just like the massive, I think we've talking about this, I think feels like for over a year or more now that there's the massive amounts of data that they have. And so everyone's talking about machine learning and artificial intelligence, but how do you can't do that unless your data is in a format that is usable and that you sort of, not having all these different data silos. And so we see a lot of customers, Tamer actually is one, they're not necessarily a fintech, but they're sort of help with this kind of data problem. And we're seeing them gain a ton of traction with banks to sort of help kind of get that in order so they can start, I think, being a little more innovative and actually using data in a way that benefits their customers.
Yeah, we've had Sunaina on from M Science, and y'all just go back and look at that show on YouTube where she talked about unstructured data and just the challenges that you face there and why you have great companies like M Science and others that doing this. Jean Donnelly, again, great question. She said, "Hey, Catherine, you do an amazing job of working with early stage to later stage startups. So what's been the biggest surprise in terms of what startups are and aren't prepared for and trying to scale up with AWS?" That's a good question.
It's a great question. I think we've been doing more work with very early stage companies. So I think when you think about startups, there's this mentality of move fast and break things. But when you're a fintech and you are dealing with sensitive data and you're selling to banks, you sort of have to be thinking about that compliance piece and the security piece really early on. And I don't think a lot of companies we're always thinking about that. And so we've actually worked, with the Sandbox and others around kind of putting in place kind of workshops to help companies think through this earlier. And that's why we want to engage even before companies are really even spending anything on AWS. We want to be engaged early, sort of, so you don't have to go back and retrofit. So I think that's something that sometimes surprises me is sort of not really thinking through that a little bit more. And just how much, I think the other thing that we do a lot of work with is around that enterprise sales cycle. And I think being a bit surprised by how long and onerous it can be. And so that's why one of the areas of focus, even though it's not, for infrastructure technology really focused, I try to think about how can we help companies think about that and more effectively go through those processes so that they can be successful. So those are kind of a couple of things that we see from fintechs.
Yeah. So we've talked about AWS working with the fintech companies. There's a flip side of that, and y'all do partner with VCs, ANIs, and others. Can you talk a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, sure. So, so the venture capital team, accelerator incubators, and partner organizations, we build relationships. With kind of all the names that you can really think about that are out there around building strategic relationships with the investors so that we can help their portfolio companies. And I think the idea is around both making sure they're getting the resources they need, like I mentioned at the very, right when they first raise that funding, very early stage. Let's get them credits, let's get them access to technical resources and support so that they can be kind of building for scale or building for whatever they need early. So I think that's kind of one of the tools that we use to make sure we're working with our customers at the time when they most need us. And then it's around building more strategic relationships with those startups. And so the VCs are often giving kind of the business development team kind of executive level, C-level relationships with the startups to kind of have more of a strategic conversation. I was amazed at when I started interviewing for this job and I spoke to my last company, the CTO, and I asked oh, who are you working with at, AWS? And they had just been a technical team, never even thought to try and get an account manager. And so they were spending a ton of money and didn't even weren't even speaking to someone and they didn't seem to even care. And so I think that's what we try to kind of get ahead of, is like, we want to make sure we're like have relationships, you have someone you can call, and we're building really strong relationships.
Yeah. So Siddharhar already just put out, hey, Catherine, I'd love to connect. Very simple,
Sure.
Siddharhar. We'll put out her contact details at the end. Quit jumping to the end, Siddharhar. By now, you know the script. Yeah, it's interesting. There's some breaking news right now I just want to touch on because it's a good friend of mine. And it actually does tie to this conversation. So Yolanda Piazza, if you don't know Yolanda, she was the CEO of Citi FinTech, been with Citi for 33 years. Announcement just went out on Business Insider that she is joining Google Cloud as their vice president of financial services. I see this as a great thing also for AWS. And let me explain why. This is my view, Catherine. Y'all had such a head start. I'll just flat out say it. They should make a movie about how Amazon moved into this space and got such a head start on the competition. And part of that just being providing great services. AWS rocks, everybody. As a company, 11FS, we build using AWS quite a bit, right? And we've used other services. But the more people from within the financial space that move into positions like what Yolanda's going to be doing, what Yo will be doing at Google Cloud, what you're doing at AWS, that's what we need. We need people that have your experience at Citi, at Lehman, maybe not Lehman. Well, it's still Lehman. That's all right. Guggenheim, right? Take your pick. But then coming out of the startup community to lead the FinTech Sandbox, you've walked in everybody's shoes. You've seen multiple sides of the table. And that's what we need. So I think hires like having you come to AWS, having Yo go to Google Cloud, good. That's what we want. We need, Dr. Abdullah brought this up. What about cybersecurity? Yeah, what about it? It's pretty much everything. So, Catherine, I just want to say from watching you on stage at Lendit several years ago to now being able to talk to you in your parents' spare bedroom, coming from my daughter's bedroom, isn't it amazing how time has moved? With that, Catherine, where's the best place for folks? Siddharhar wants to reach out to you and talk to you. So
great, yeah.
For people to reach out to you, is it LinkedIn, Twitter?
Yes, yeah, sure. I'm a poor user of Twitter. I'm a consumer. I don't really contribute. So definitely LinkedIn. Send me a note. And then we also have a ton of resources on AWS startups online. But yeah, definitely feel free to reach out directly, and happy to connect.
All right, folks. I mean, you're not going to ask for a better connection at a great company. So Siddharhar, reach out to her on LinkedIn. Everybody, thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Thank you every day for tuning in and for the questions you ask. Tomorrow is going to be a great show. I'm going to have Abby Wiamu from Asusa is going to be on. I just did a podcast with him that went out last Friday that is easily one of the favorite ones I've ever done. Abby is going to be incredible. Another New Yorker, by the way. So seems to be a theme we have. Everyone else, as always, don't hesitate to reach out, man. If you want to talk to me, at Sam Maul on Twitter. I am a consumer and contributor because of my ADD. Sam at 11FS, or you can ping us at breakfastshow@11fs.com. Everybody, thanks for joining. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks. Bye.